Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump is on his first foreign visit since becoming president. His first stop was Saudi Arabia, where he signed deals worth more than $350 billion with the Saudi government. In that deal is an agreement for $110 billion for arms. The White House says it is the single biggest in U.S. history.
U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in Saudi Arabia on a sunny Saturday aboard the Air Force One. He descended the steps with First Lady Melania Trump to a red carpet and the warm handshake of King Salman. He later settled into a short reception at the airport, where he and King Salman had coffee. The signing of multi-billion-dollar deals between Saudi oil giant Aramco and U.S. companies was said to be historic for the leadership of both countries. 16 agreements with 11 companies worth $50 billion were signed, including memoranda of understanding for joint ventures. The deal illustrated Saudi Arabia's hunger for foreign capital and technology as it tries to reduce its dependence on oil exports. Low oil prices in the past couple of years have slowed the economy to a crawl and saddled the government with a huge budget deficit. Both King Salman and President Trump later had private talks after a royal banquet and even participated in a signing ceremony of agreements, including a $100 billion deal for Saudi Arabia to buy American arms. The summit in Saudi Arabia is expected to focus on combating Islamist militants and the growing regional influence of Iran. President Trump has been a fierce critic of an international deal with Iran, which eased sanctions in return for a curb on its nuclear activities. And unlike former President Barack Obama, President Trump is not expected to highlight human rights during his trip. King Salman presented President Trump with the kingdom's top civilian honor. He was then decorated with a gold King Abdulaziz medal during a meeting at the royal court in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Accompanied President Trump on his 8-day trip to Saudi Arabia, Israel, Palestine, Brussels, the Vatican, and Sicily is Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, his daughter Ivanka, and her husband Jared Kushner, who is a key member of the Trump administration.
Speaking of the United States and the Trump administration, my colleague Ajuri Ngalale caught up with the acting Deputy Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, Christopher Runyan, and spoke to him about the management of U.S. foreign policy towards Africa, especially under the new administration. Christopher's responsibility as USAID Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator is West Africa and the Sahel region. He was previously USAID's Senior Coordinator for the President's Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI.
This program, the Young African Leaders Initiative, also known as the Mandela Washington Fellowship, we know that this has been a priority now for the United States government for a few years. What is the perspective or the assessment of the United States government about the role that this program can play, not just in positioning African leaders individually, but also positioning Africa in the global community?
One thing I would say is about YALI. There is an architecture of it and sort of three main components. So the Mandela Washington Fellowship, which a lot of people are familiar with, which is a wonderful part of the program where we bring people to the United States for training and then provide them support, be that mentoring or coaching or practicum opportunities in companies or in organizations, is one component of that. Another is the YALI Regional Leadership Centers, which was bringing YALI to Africa and establishing places where this same type of inspired training could take place here in Africa to a much larger group of people for a lower cost per person. And was really a result of the kind of response that we had for the Mandela Washington Fellowship when it was first conceptualized. And then the third I'd cite is the YALI Network, which is predominantly a virtual network, but is growing increasingly into a network that also gets together in person in Africa. And that includes hundreds of thousands of young African leaders who are making change in their communities, but may not necessarily have the ability or the time to participate in either the Mandela Washington Fellowship or to be able to take weeks off of work to be able to come to a regional leadership center training program. So those are three parts of the program I just want folks to understand. But to your strategic question, what's the relationship here and why? I think the most important part is Africa is dramatically important to the world. It is an amazing place of diversity, of resources, of talent, of potential, and the world wants to interact with Africa. And I think that was really an engine behind creating these programs in the first place. And YALI is an umbrella set of programs that includes all those pieces I just mentioned.
One of the very interesting developments or trends that we've seen on the continent in recent years has been a pretty dramatic uptick in the involvement of certain countries across the continent. When I say so, I think of China, for example, who offer loans, low-interest loans from state-run banks to facilitate infrastructure projects across the continent. Is there any kind of sense in the United States that that it's being left behind in terms of its involvement in this continent? So much promise, so much economic potential?
I think that, I mean, the breadth of our engagement in Africa is from coast to coast, top to bottom. I think the United States is very, very interested and very engaged in Africa. And it would be poor policy for our own national security and our own foreign policy interests to disengage with Africa. So I don't see that as a possible outcome. With regards to China or Europe or other parts of the world that also see potential in further engagement with Africa, in most cases we welcome that. It's not as though the United States, for example, was going to provide the world's capital or the world's ability to engage with Africa. It's not for the United States to choose. That's a global engagement question, and I think Africa is wise to engage broadly with a wide number of partners. So I think there's really what I guess is inspiring and fun is the fact that Africa is so lively as a place to engage, and so many other parts of the world believe that Africa is a huge part of their destiny as well as Africa's destiny.
Mr. Runyan, we know that much of the leadership crises, particularly in the African continent, have to do with stagnant leadership, leadership that perhaps lacks vision. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, when we talk about young African leaders, this YALI initiative, why is the United States so keenly interested in investing in young African leaders as opposed to just maybe African leaders of all ages?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ajuri. I think as we've seen, in some cases, Africa's potential is held back by some of its leaders. And that lack of inclusion of young people, that lack of representation of their interests, really creates a disconnect between the state and the people. And that doesn't help us all achieve the kind of progress and potential that Africa holds for itself and for the world. It hinders progress in political rights, in human rights. It hinders the ability for Africa's economies to grow with regressive policies. And it certainly doesn't help to create the Africa that we all know exists, the one of entrepreneurship, the one of energy, the one of engagement, the one that loves to learn and engage with the world and share its amazing lessons. And so closed societies or societies that prevent that voice from getting out are things, obviously, that the United States doesn't want to see continue.
And that's the program this week. I'm glad you could join us. Let's do this again next time. Stay in touch, though, using any of our Twitter handles. I am Amarachi Ubani. Have a great week.